I'm Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks podcast. We talk about everything that matters to Pittsburgh, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics, to practical day-to-day life. And today, we are talking about the issue of gun control. Is there a common sense, reasonable middle ground when it comes to gun control? Or is it that the Democrats are wanting to take everybody's gun from them, and the Republican position of, you know what, I don't want anything to get in the way of me having a firearm, and there is no new law that could be passed that would make a difference. In fact, what we want to see are fewer laws that are ultimately on the books. Well, this all comes up now because just a few days ago, there was a rally in Harrisburg, a pro-Second Amendment rally, and it's drawing ever-decreasing numbers of people. And you got to ask yourself why that happens to be the case, even though there are more and more guns that are ultimately being sold, it seems, especially over recent years. Why is it that a rally to protect the right to own a firearm would be getting a diminished number of people to come to it? Well, after I give you some of the quotes that were said during this rally, you may understand why. Plus, if you just look at what's happening around the country when it comes to the issue of violent crime, we have been told that the best solution to violent gun crime is for us to have a firearm. And so we went out and purchased them. By the tens of millions, we've purchased firearms over recent years. People getting handguns, men, women, white, black, doesn't make a difference. And are we safer? No. Are the streets safer? No. Murders are up at levels that we've not seen, proportionally speaking, since the early 1970s, when many people dream of the fond times of years gone by when you can have your doors unlocked and didn't care about anything because everything was safe. But back in 1972, 73, 74, we had murder rates that exceed even what we're experiencing right now. So why are we having this problem with gun crime? And not only in the inner cities of America, you also have a gun problem when it comes to mass shootings. And we also have another gun problem that rarely gets spoken about. And the problem is suicides. We have about 25 to 30,000 people every single year on average that take their own life to firearms. In fact, more people die every year from their own firearm usage. They willfully take their own life, suicide, with a firearm. More people die that way than by murder. Now, granted, we all are just shocked at what happens when a murder makes the news, but we don't even pay attention to all the people who take their own life by firearms. And there are two pieces of legislation that were recently passed by Democrats in the House of Representatives in Harrisburg. And the two pieces were, one, expanded background checks. The other was a red flag piece of legislation. And now it's off to the Senate. And this organization, these Republicans and pro-gun rights people that had this rally, they feel so threatened by these two pieces of legislation, these two bills. And I get the idea that some people think, well, if you give in at all, then they're going to come in and take them all away. And what they do is they go to quotes like this one from House Speaker Joanna McClinton, a Democrat from Philadelphia. And she says, while this is just the first step by passing these common sense and responsible gun safety measures, I could read more, but the people who are pro-gun stopped listening. They stop listening at, while this is just the first step. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what else are they going to do? Are they going to come and confiscate my guns? Are they going to make it illegal for us to have them and then completely deny or try to deny us our Second Amendment rights? And so with that, it's just complete shutdown mode. The ability to think and reason has then been suspended. And there's nothing you can say at that point that would bring them back. They go on to ridiculous statements like Representative Stephanie Borowitz, a Republican from Clinton County, saying that any Republican that thinks they can vote for this today, know that you are aiding and abetting the socialism and communism that the Democrats are pushing in this nation. And you just go to buzzwords. That's it. You don't talk about the legitimacy of a piece of legislation. You just go buzzwords because you just can't think things through anyway. You're just left with that. There was another bill that ultimately failed out of the House, and I thought it was a pretty reasonable one, too. We'll talk about that one as well. It's the reporting of lost or stolen firearms. It failed by a 100 to 101 vote. These measures, in my mind, are all common sense measures. They all make sense, and they're not about infringing on individuals' rights and liberties, and in many ways, they are about preserving life. Let's go over this. We'll start off with the expanded background checks. And with the expanded background check, it's for every firearm that would be sold inside the Commonwealth, every single one. And what they are wanting to do in having this is to make it so that everybody, if you're looking at having a gun sale that takes place privately, you and a friend, you have to have this background check. And here's the way it is being reported in the news. This is from PennLive.com. The bill passed through the House. It would raise and require background checks for all gun sales, including the sale of long guns between parties who were not licensed dealers, where background checks are currently not mandated. And people ask, well, why would you do that? Well, in my mind, I like to think myself to be a responsible gun owner. I own a handgun, I own a hunting rifle, and I own what people would call an assault rifle. I own one of those two. I am not going to sell one of them to anybody that doesn't go through a background check. If you want to buy my firearm, there will be a background check that will take place. You don't want to go through the background check? I'm not selling you my firearm. Because in my mind, a responsible gun owner is comfortable with owning firearms, and that gun owner that's responsible is also comfortable with the idea of selling it to somebody else. But a responsible, law-abiding gun owner that is interested in peace and not promoting criminality is going to require a background check. Anything short of that is a complete disregard for anybody else's welfare. There's no conscience that is being applied. How can you think that you are doing that and have that clear conscience by just giving the firearm to just anybody? Well, I wouldn't give it to just anybody. These people are, it's somebody that I kind of know, at least a little bit. Oh, so do you know the criminal backgrounds of every individual that's in your life outside of maybe your spouse, brothers and sisters and children? Do you? How many of them do you know that are on medications, that have been given clinical diagnoses of depression? How many of them do you know? These are things that are kept very private, very intimate. They don't go around telling everybody about these things. I would want a criminal background check. And I think any responsible gun owner would want a criminal background check for the sale of their own firearm. And for those that would sell firearms without a background check, you are not a responsible gun owner. You are not taking your right to have a firearm responsibly, because you have rights, and then with rights, you have some responsibilities too. And if you're not going to do it on your own, don't you think we should have a law in place so that those that would not behave in a particular way would then be punished for not doing so? Seems like an automatic to me. The other piece of legislation that passed is a red flag law. This red flag law would allow judges to order the temporary confiscation of a person's firearms if they are found to be a danger to themselves or to others. Now, considering that we are on pace for a record year of mass shootings, do you think it is a stretch to suggest that these people are not mentally fit to have a firearm? That maybe there would be a sign that somebody could pick up on, and then if laws like this were in place, would be able to do something about to get the firearms off of them. How about this one? when you look at the suicides that we have in this country, and the majority of them by firearms, and the majority of firearm-related deaths are by suicide, we're talking about really saving people's lives by having a red flag law in place so that those that have access would then not be able to continue to have that access. They don't hurt others. And you know about the individuals that will then, not even in a mass shooting scenario, but they'll take somebody and they'll kill a loved one, an estranged lover, and then they'll kill themselves. Maybe an ex-spouse and the children, and then themselves. Wouldn't it be great if something could be done to keep them from having the means to go about doing that? Well, man, you're not going to make it perfect. I get that. But are we going to make perfect the enemy of the good? Does it have to be absolutely perfect in order for it to be in place? No. What you have to do is weigh things and say, does the greater good outweigh what negative side there could be associated with this? Well, there could be people who would lose their firearms, and the people who triggered this were doing it maliciously. In fact, that was a concern of one of the individuals that spoke at the recent rally that took place in Harrisburg. In fact, this is David Burnett. He says, these red flag laws can be triggered in a malicious way. Well, instead of just saying no to the legislation and then shutting your mind down and then coming up with the trigger words like we talked about earlier, why not propose an amendment that would make it so that anybody that would use a red flag law maliciously, vindictively, would then be prosecuted by the law, that there would be a law that they would be breaking in order to make sure you put up the guardrails in order to protect people's rights that are being maliciously infringed upon, right? And then at the same time, recognizing that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the liberty part that we are all wanting firearms to be able to help protect us, and in some cases, life as well, that you don't ensure that those continue to have firearms that are ready, willing, and then able to take their own life and arguably even worse, taking other people's lives as well. Red flag laws. David Burnett also said this: red flag laws have been shown by research to not work very well. They are ripe for abuse by people and can be triggered in a malicious way. And I'm wondering, was he thinking about the red flag laws, or was he thinking about guns in general when he said this? Because guns have been shown by research to not work very well in preventing crime. Well, they don't, considering the fact that we have, 40 million firearms, if not more, all over the country, and we still have a crime rate that is absolutely through the roof at this point? How effective has it been? Not all that effective. Guns are ripe for abuse by people. You better believe they are. We're right back to the crimes I was talking about and the suicides, and can be triggered in a malicious way outside of target shooting, okay? Every firearm that is drawn on any person is drawn in a malicious way. You are doing it with the intention of doing harm. And for those that are hoping that they can just pull it out and show it, and that'll be enough, at least the threat of harm. It sounds malicious to me. Outside of sports shooting, and you could even say that hunting is done maliciously. The individual who's doing the hunting is doing it in a malicious way against that creature that's being hunted. Which goes back to another interesting comment that was made at this rally. Guns are not inherently violent. Okay. First of all, yes, they are. The guns were invented to be violent. The proper use of a firearm is to do violence to someone or something. This statement was made by Carice Crew. She is the wife of Gerald Crew. He's the founder of the organization That Gun Talk. And they created this out of a need, this feeling that they need to be able to promote more gun safety. Interestingly enough, because Carice Crew was in trouble at an airport in Philadelphia. She was at a Philadelphia International Airport, and she accidentally left a Glock handgun in her purse, which was then discovered by TSA agents. So now they create this organization, That Gun Talk. I'm glad to see that they recognized that they were irresponsible gun owners. Having firearms and not knowing where your firearm is at all time, especially the one that you use for personal protection, not knowing it was in her own purse. But she said people choose to enact violence using guns. Guns are not inherently violent. People choose to enact violence using nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are not inherently violent. People choose to enact violence using aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers are not inherently violent. Grenades, tanks, missiles, you name them. Name it. They're not inherently violent. What is the practical use of a firearm outside of violence? There isn't one. There is not one. Not one that is in its intended purpose. Every firearm that you go to a local gun store to purchase, every single one of them was manufactured and prepared to be sold for the express intended purpose of violence. Now, I'm not saying that that violence is criminal. No. There are some violence that's absolutely justifiable. If somebody's assaulting you, then you can use that violence back at them to stop it. That's acceptable. If you are a hunter, you are bringing about that violence on a justifiable target. Dinner, right? But please, don't tell me it's not about violence. That's all that it's about. Everybody who's running around over the past few years buying firearms because they're concerned about the crimes that are taking place, they're concerned about violence, and they think the best way to meet that violence is with their own violence, or at least threat thereof. At least that. The husband of Carice Crew, Gerald Crew, said that without the Second Amendment, nothing else would matter. That Second Amendment protects everything else. This from the man who's using the First Amendment to defend the argument of the Second Amendment. The First Amendment is the First Amendment because the First Amendment is paramount. You can't make an argument, whether it's at the steps of the Capitol, inside a Capitol, on a podcast, radio show, TV show, social media, for or against anything without the First Amendment. You take away the First Amendment, then everything else can easily fall. It's the first that holds up everything else, not the threat of violence that holds up everything else. It's not the way that it works, not even close. The one piece of legislation that failed was the legislation regarding the mandatory reporting. And it was a close vote. It would only fail by one vote. But it was a very important singular vote, 100 to 101. And that bill required gun owners to report a lost or stolen firearm to police within 3 days. And repeat offenders would have faced a misdemeanor charge. Now, this goes back to the responsible gun owner. What responsible gun owner doesn't report to authorities that their firearm was stolen? What responsible gun owner doesn't report to authorities that it was lost? I had a firearm stolen from me. Relative that was at my home when I wasn't there just went through all my personal possessions, hunting high and low for something, and then ultimately found it. As soon as I knew that that firearm was missing, I immediately called the DA's office to let them know this is what happened. And this is who I presume stole it, a relative. I pressed charges. That's what a responsible gun owner does. An irresponsible gun owner will allow a firearm to be stolen, lose it, and then not bother saying anything to anybody at all. See, I reported it because I was concerned that, one, it was out there, and I knew just reporting it wasn't going to collect it. But I also wanted the legal authorities to know that whatever mischief that could have then come as a result of an individual having that firearm, I am not associated with it. So I reported it. I was made known some 8-9 months later that the firearm was involved in an officer-involved shooting. The officer was not hurt in any way. The individual was arrested, charged, and then pled guilty to his crime. I'm not saying all of this to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying this is what responsible people do. And so for those that would not be responsible, then you have a law in place to compel them to be. There's something else that is intended with this legislation. Is that there are people who will acquire a firearm, and then sometime later, once the police discover it, as they arrest somebody and they contract the serial number back to the person who last owned it, as it was a handgun, and then they'll say, oh, yeah, I lost that. Oh, yeah, that was stolen. When in reality, what they did was they purchased it with the sole intent of providing it to somebody else in a criminal nature, right? And then they used that as an excuse just to get out of being in trouble. Because straw purchasing for a criminal, one who otherwise cannot legally own the firearm, is a crime. But if you say it was lost or stolen, I wish I could help you, officer, but I just can't. What we want to do is have a legislation like this, a law like this, that would make it more difficult for them to make up these ridiculous stories. You know, we're all saying that we're concerned about the number of firearms that are on the streets. You realize how many firearms are reported stolen or discovered to be stolen in any given year? It's over 230,000 firearms per year. Why wouldn't responsible gun owners report that? I don't know. And why would people be opposed to these things? Outside of the knee-jerk reaction as I described earlier, is there real good logic? Is there a thought process that's behind all of this? I don't believe that there is. Adam Garber, the executive director of Ceasefire PA, says this: Pennsylvanians want solutions to a gun violence crisis that has spiraled out of control. And the question for everyone that's listening right now is, do you want solutions? Do you believe the solutions are solutions that can come from some aspect of government? Or do you think that the opposite is true, that the only solution to the gun violence crisis that we have in this country is we just don't own enough firearms yet? Maybe if we can get to 500 million firearms in the hands of the American people, that'll do it. Or maybe it's 1 billion. I don't know what the number is. But do you want solutions to gun violence? And do you think that government has any role to play in any of this? He went on to say our elected officials should focus on what is going to keep firearms away from people who want to hurt themselves or others. And I think he's right. That's why you have a red flag law. That's why you have mandatory background checks for every gun transfer. Yes, but man, Gino, what about all these illegal guns that are circulating? I get that. I'm not saying that it's perfect. But if we can get to the point to where we make it more difficult for people to be a straw purchaser, then you limit the number of guns that are in the system illegally. If you had people who were more responsible with the guns that they had and who they sold them to, you'd limit the number of guns that are used in violent crimes. If individuals who own these firearms were more responsible with their firearms to ensure that they weren't stolen in the first place legitimately, we'd do a lot in order to control the number of firearms that are available in the criminal realm. Now, one of the pieces of legislation that also didn't even make it out of committee was a bill that would require a firearm trigger lock on all long guns. I don't see the problem with that one either. How's that infringing on your right to bear something if there's a lock that comes along with it? And if you're not going to be using it, what is wrong with having a lock on it so that nobody else can either? I just don't understand. I genuinely do not. I'd like to get your reaction to all of this. You're welcome to go to my website, manginotalks.com. There's a place there for you to be able to insert your email address and send me a message that way. I post this kind of stuff up on all of my social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of that. You're welcome to comment there as well. The issue of gun control in America, especially here in Pennsylvania. Are Democrats in this particular case out to take away your firearms or keep you from being able to have them in the first place? If you're a criminal, yes. If you're a danger to yourself and to others, yes. If you are a law-abiding gun owner in Pennsylvania that has no desire to do any harm to anyone, your right to bear arms is fully protected with the legislation that's being considered. Thank you very much for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast. New episodes drop Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. For more on me and the show and anything you want me to talk about, be sure to visit manginotalks.com. Send me an email. Follow me on your favorite social media platforms, too, by just using @ManginoTalks, or you can just Google me, Mangino Talks. And once you find me, please like the pages, follow the pages, subscribe to the pages, and then share them with your friends and family. And thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.